We are starting on page Kuf Lamed Aleph, which, as was pointed out, is opposite of page 260. And we are... Sorry?
That would have more got me in trouble.
What's his name? David, your hearing aid is making noise.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
How good?
Now it's fine. Nice hat, by the way.
Go along with the weather.
To go over. There you go. It matches the weather. Okay, take 3. So we are holding in Iggeres HaKodesh, Siman Chaf. We are on page Kuf Lamed Aleph, which is opposite of page 260, and we are in the middle of a topic which we started talking about last week, and we need to let's review what we spoke about because we did not exhaust the conversation. We did not finish explaining everything. So for those of you who recall, last week we said like this. We're talking about the idea of the Chosim HaMishapich, which is the inverted seal. Remember Sasson? Remember talking about the seal? That when you sign something with a signet ring,
Into wax.
so it's always going to be the opposite. It's always going to be if the seal is raised,
Reverse.
it's going to be the reverse, right? If the seal is raised, so
Like a negative in the camera.
like a negative in the camera, exactly. So the same thing is also the idea of dir b'tachtoina. The concept of dir b'tachtoina means that whatever above is higher and more important, as it comes down into the system of the worlds, it becomes lower. Which is why that's why the lower is always the greater one. So we spoke about this idea, and obviously the larger concept we're talking about here is Malchus. That Malchus is the lowest of the spheres, but the Gili of the Ein Sof, the revelation of the Ein Sof, as we spoke on several occasions, is in Malchus. But then we started talking about a little bit different topic, which is that we know that in Kabbalah it's explained that the mitzvahs are associated with the Hay of Hashem's name, the last Hay of Hashem's name. Which incidentally, the last Hay of Hashem's name corresponds to Malchus. And then we have the Torah corresponds to the Vav of Hashem's name. Now the Vav of Hashem's name is higher than the Hay of Hashem's name. It goes in order. The Yud is the highest, then the first Hay follows that, and then comes the Vav, and the lowest letter of Hashem's name is the last Hay of Hashem's name. So therefore, as it turns out, mitzvahs are lower than Torah. Which is talking about, we say, V'talmud Torah can neged kulam. Torah is higher than mitzvahs. However, as it turns out, and let's do this again inside. We're going to start on page Kuf Lamed Aleph, 9 lines from the top. Last word in the line which says Ubazeh. Ubazeh Yuvan, with this we understand. We did this already inside. We did this last week, but we'll review it because there's a lot more to say on the topic. Now we understand how Yesa mitzvahs, the Malchus, mitzvahs are associated with the Malchus, which is Hey Shal Shem Havaya. Malchus is the Hay of Hashem's name. Torah is Bezah, and Zeir Anpin, which is the Midas, which is Vav, Shal Shem Havaya, which is the Vav of Hashem's name. Now the Alter Rebbe points out, Agam, even though that elsewhere in Kabbalah we find out Shalom Mailam, that higher than Atzilus. In other words, now we're talking about in Atzilus. In Atzilus is where you have the Hay and the Vav, right? The Zeir Anpin and Malchus. But higher than Atzilus, in the source of Torah, which is in Keser, Ba'arach Anpin, HaMitzvahs hein begulgalta, the mitzvahs are in the skull, belavnunis, the whiteness, Hia urcha de bepalgusa de sare. It is the road that splits up by the hairs, the mispalga, which divides the tayag urchin, the eraisa, into the 613 roads of the Torah, Shebezah, which is in Zah. So, what did we find out? Mitzvahs are sourced in the skull, which is the whiteness, which is the way that eventually divides up by the hairs into the 613 ways of the Torah. The Sheiresh HaTorah, and the source of Torah, the Nafka Mechachmeilah, Torah, which comes from Chachma. But what is the source? That's an Atzilus. But what is the source of Torah? Hu b'moicha stima da'arech anpin. Is in the hidden brain of Arech Anpin. V'hainu ha'chachma, the time mitzvahs, which is the Chachma, which is in the reasons of the mitzvahs. So what do we have over here? That in the world of Atzilus, in the system of worlds, Torah is higher. Torah is in the Vav, in the Zah, and the mitzvahs are in Hay, which is in Malchus. But in Keser, as we said last week, Keser, Torah is in Moicha Stima, the hidden brain, Whereas the mitzvahs are in
Recording
Gulgalta.
in progress.
Whereas mitzvahs are in Gulgalta, mitzvahs are in the skull, which, as we explained last week, the skull is higher than the brain. That's why the skull covers the brain, goes around the brain because it's higher. So that means, which is in Keser, what we have over there is that in Keser, mitzvahs are higher than Torah. So how is it that if in Keser, in the source, mitzvahs are higher than Torah, how is it that once we get into Atzilus, Torah is higher than mitzvahs? Ella, rather, the Rebbe says, the reason is, but this is like a choisam ha-misapich, like an inverted seal, which is explained that which is higher above becomes lower down here. Okay, that's reviewing what we did last week. And now I want to go into some of the details which we did not have time for last week. What we're going to find out over here is that there are 4 different levels. There is the mitzvahs as they are in Keser, Torah as it is in Keser, and as we already learned, in Keser, mitzvahs are higher than Torah. Then there's the Torah as it is in Atzilus, and the mitzvahs as they are in Atzilus, and in Atzilus, Torah is higher than mitzvahs. What are these 4 different levels? How do mitzvahs begin? Where do mitzvahs, what do they begin as? What do they originate as? So this is something that we've discussed on various occasions over the years. The mitzvahs all originate in Hashem's ratzon, in Hashem's desire, in Hashem's will. Which means, essentially, at their core, mitzvahs have no reason. They're purely, we do them because Hashem wants us to do them. Not only we do them because Hashem wants us to do them, but they are essentially Hashem's ratzon, which transcends logic. There is no reason for them. This is Hashem's desire. All the mitzvahs. Hashem wants us to do these mitzvahs. These 613 mitzvahs, these are Hashem's desire. And as we discussed on various occasions, it is precisely because of this level of mitzvahs as they are in ratzon that we say that, Alti Yeshev v'Shoikel, don't consider mitzvahs a big mitzvah, a small mitzvah. Every single mitzvah is Hashem's ratzon, is Hashem's will. There's no difference between one mitzvah and another mitzvah. And then the mitzvahs come down and they enter seichel, meaning after Hashem already has the will for the mitzvahs, then Hashem develops reasons for the mitzvahs also. However, within the reasons of the mitzvahs, there are 2 levels.
Recording in progress.
There is one level of the mitzvahs one level of the reasons is what the Rebbe calls over here is the taimei ha-mitzvahs. Where is it? Chachma, the taimei ha-mitzvahs. That is the reasons of the mitzvahs as they are in Keser. And these are, because it's in Keser, this is higher than the system of worlds. These are the reasons for the mitzvahs which human beings cannot comprehend whatsoever. Every single mitzvah has a reason. In Keser, every single mitzvah has seichel behind it, has a tam, has a reason to it. But the reasons as they are in Keser, because it's so high and it's so lofty, again, it is before it enters the system of worlds, it's not something that we can appreciate. Most mitzvahs afterwards enter the system of the worlds, and they now they enter Chachma of Atzilus. Once we have reasons which human beings or worlds can relate to, those are the reasons of the Torah that we study. Certain mitzvahs, chukim, for example, para aduma, we're going to learn about in 2 weeks, they never entered, the reasons for those mitzvahs never entered the system of the worlds. Now, does that mean that para aduma doesn't have a reason? Para aduma has a reason. But its reason is in moichas tima, which is the hidden brain. The hidden brain of Hashem, it's hidden and we have no access to it. Human beings cannot understand it whatsoever. But every mitzvah really, so again, mitzvahs originate, level 1 is in Hashem's ratzon, and in Hashem's ratzon there is no reason. It's a simple desire of Hashem. He wants us to do mitzvahs. Next level is moichas tima, is the hidden reasons, which are hidden from all human beings. Which, by the way, when Mashiach comes, that's what we are all going to. That's going to be the big chiddush. We're going to learn these hidden reasons for the mitzvahs, as Rashi says in the beginning of, if I recall correctly, the beginning of Shir Hashirim, on the pasuk Yishakeni Minashikes Piu. That this is, what does Rashi say? That when Mashiach comes, I'll say that we're going to learn the secrets of the Torah. These are the secrets, the secrets of the Torah as they are in Moichas Tima. That's what we're going to learn when Mashiach comes. The reasons for all the mitzvahs. Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, L'cha ani megala. The Medrash tells us that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, L'cha ani megala tam para. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to access the reason for Para Aduma as it is in Keser, as it is in Moichas Tima. But for most of us, we can only grasp the reasons, the revealed reasons, which enter in the world of Atzilus. And then there is the mitzvahs, the actual mitzvahs, and that's in Malchus. So here we have the 4 levels. Okay, so we have in Keser, you have the first the Ratzon, and then after, and the Ratzon is symbolized by the skull because it transcends. It's above seichel. It's above reason. So mitzvahs, where do they originate? In Hashem's Ratzon, which is the Gulgalta, which, by the way, as the Alter Rebbe points out over here, it's the lavnunis, which is the whiteness, because whiteness implies simplicity. Once the mitzvahs enter reasons, once every mitzvah gets a reason, then every mitzvah has its own uniqueness and has, you might want to say, its own color. And every mitzvah is its own road. But in Ratzon, in Hashem's Ratzon, every mitzvah is the same. Every single mitzvah is Hashem's desire that we do that. Meaning, what's the difference between the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan and the mitzvah of putting up a mezuzah and the mitzvah of eating carbon Pesach? What's the difference? So, what do you mean? A lot of differences. We do with the Shiluach HaKan, there's this reason for it. And the mitzvah of carbon Pesach, there's this reason for it. And the mitzvah of putting up mezuzah is another reason for it. But these differences in mitzvahs are only because of the reasons. But before mitzvahs have reasons, when mitzvahs are still in the level of Hashem's Ratzon, then what's the difference between one mitzvah and another mitzvah? Hashem wants us to do this and that. They're all a singular expression of Hashem's will. Hashem wants us to do mitzvahs.
Why? To get tzachar.
You have children?
Yes.
Why do you love them?
Because this is from Hashem, to love the parents, is to love the kids.
So you looked in the Torah and said there's a mitzvah to love my child, so you love your child?
No.
So why do you love your child?
The child is part of you. Because he loves himself.
Okay. So who said you have to love something that's part of you?
If you can't love yourself, you can't love Hashem.
Any child is not part of you. You're speaking poetics. And someone who has had a kidney removed doesn't love their kidney. By the way, there could be a lot of reasons, but these reasons all follow the fact. They don't have the reasons. There are certain things in life. There are certain things that the reason why there is no why. That's what I want. That's what I want.
But why Hashem made one mitzvah very hard and one mitzvah easy? One mitzvah everybody does, one mitzvah most people doesn't do. If it's the same, all the same, so they have to have the same category, the same way to love every mitzvah. My machronim, 90% of the people doesn't do. It's a mitzvah kala, but they don't do. Put tefillin, everybody does. So it's mean that this is stronger.
In terms of the Ratzon HaElyon, there is no difference between a mitzvah and a Torah, a mitzvah and a Rabbanon. They're equal Ratzon. In terms of the reasons are different. But in terms of the Ratzon is the same in every single thing. There's no difference. Things become different when there are reasons for them. But when you have a Ratzon which is L'mayla Matam Badas, we have a Ratzon which transcends logic, a desire that transcends logic. And everyone in our life, there are different examples of desire that transcends logic. You could think of things that you want, and if you can ask you why, there is no why. By the way, yeah, you can make a bunch of excuses. You can give reasons why, but those aren't really the reasons. Those reasons follow the fact that you wanted them. Hashem wants us to do mitzvahs. Why? That's what He wants. Akasha Famaisa.
Okay.
So again, and now we can do this inside. Now it'll make more sense what we're saying right now. Hagam. Let's look inside. I want to read this again. I know this is the third time we're reading it. We read it once last week and the third time, but now for the first time, I think we'll be able to make sense out of every one of the elements that we're reading over here. Now we'll understand the mitzvahs are sourced in Malchus, which is the Hey Shel Shem Havaya, the Hey of Hashem's name. Torah is Bizah. And Zeir Anpin, which is the Vav Shel Shem Havaya, which means that in the system of worlds, Torah is higher than mitzvahs. Hagam, even though Shalamayla Barach Anpin, higher up in Arach Anpin, which is in Keser, HaMitzvahs, we are the mitzvahs, Hein B'Golgalta, the mitzvahs are in the skull, which is the Ratzin, which is above Seichel. Bilavnunis, the whiteness, right? He Ha'urcha, which is the way, the path, because on the level of Ratzin, all mitzvahs are one road. They're one road that leads us to Hashem. Once we come to the reasons of mitzvahs, so every mitzvah now is a separate road. But on the level of Ratzin, it's a urcha. It is one road, the Bepalgusa, that eventually divides up the Sari, which is by the years. We're not going to get into what that is. But the Mispalga, which then it divides L'Taryag Urch into 613 roads, the Iraisa, the 613 roads of the Torah. Mitzvahs are one road. In the Torah is where we get the reasons for it. That's where we have the 613 different roads, Shebez Eir Ampin, which appear in Zeir Ampin. But V'shoyrish HaTorah, what is the source of Torah? The Nafke Mechachmi, La Torah Taka comes from Chachma, Avatzilus. But what is the Shoyrish of Torah? Sorry?
What's the mispalka?
That divides. So in other words, the one path, because all mitzvahs begin as a single path, which is Shem's Ratzin. But then once they get reasons, that's when they divide up into the 613 different paths. But the Shoyrish HaTorah, the source of Torah, the Nafke Mechachmi Allah, which comes from Chachma Allah, when Mechastima, the Arachampin is in the hidden. Torah source is in the hidden seichel, in the hidden brain of Arachampin. V'hainu, which is a Chachma, the Taimiyah mitzvahs. The Chachma, which is in the reasons of the mitzvahs, but although those are the reasons that we don't understand. But how does that make sense? That in Keser, mitzvahs are higher and Torah is lower. Mitzvahs are in the Golgalta and the Lavnunis, and Torah is Namechastima. And once we get down to Atzilus, it's the other way around. Torah is in Zah, mitzvahs are Malchus, Ella, Shukechoisim HaMishapech. But as we explained, the whole system works like an inverted seal, and therefore that which is above the system of worlds is higher. Once it enters the system of worlds, becomes lower. And that's why mitzvahs, which are sourced in Hashem's Ratzin, in the Golgalta, when they come into the world, they are in Malchus, which is lower. We know it's Tchilasan B'Soifan, and the beginning is always wedged in the end, right? So what's the beginning over here? The beginning is the Golgalta, and the end is the mitzvahs as they are in Malchus. The beginning is wedged in the end. And now Without Rebbe is going to say something, and we're going to do this first outside. Then we'll do it inside, so we don't have to read it twice again. What we do, but to understand what the Rebbe is going to say, we have to back up a little, which is remind ourselves what the larger topic of conversation over here. Up until now, we were talking about the idea that the greatness of Malchus is that the Eir Ein Sof reveals itself in Malchus. In which way? And how does that manifest itself? It expresses itself in the fact that Malchus is able to create Yesh Mi'ayin. That was the larger conversation before we started our conversation here about Torah and mitzvahs. And now we're finding out another area where the Eir Ein Sof is revealed in Malchus, and that is that the highest level of the Eir Ein Sof, which is the Golgalta, is revealed in the mitzvahs which are in Malchus. What's the connection between these two things? In other words, the first thing we were talking about the entire time, which is how the Eir Ein Sof is revealed in Malchus to create worlds, to create Yesh Mi'ayin. And now we're saying how the Eir Ein Sof is revealed in Malchus, which is in the mitzvahs. What's the connection between these two? As we mentioned, the idea of a melech is that a melech has an am which is nifradim, an am, a nation which is separate. And that is why, what does a melech do? A melech gives decrees to his nation. Gives mitzvahs. The melech is mitzvah, gives commandments. He issues decrees, commandments. The idea of a mitzvah can only exist when there is something separate from you. To command, there has to be a mitzvah and a mitzvah. I am commanding you. If there is nothing other than me, then there can't be a mitzvah. I can't command myself to do something. There's a fascinating sikha where the Rebbe talks about the idea that it says in the Medrash, there's a Medrash that says that mitzvahs betelos la'asad lavai. When Mashiach comes, the mitzvahs will be batal. Problem with that is, we know that one of the Ikri HaMunah, one of the mainstays, the foundations of Yiddishkeit is Zoyis HaTorah Leitehei Muchlefes. And Torah and mitzvahs are la'ad l'om yelav, and Torah and mitzvahs are forever and ever.
How could they be both?
And by the way, why is it that mitzvahs are forever and ever? It's a very simple cheshbon. Based on what we spoke about today. If a mitzvah has a reason, then theoretically one day, if that reason stops applying, then the mitzvah would become batal. There wouldn't be a need for the mitzvah anymore. So let's say a certain mitzvah, let's say, for example, let's say that the reason why we put up a mitzvah is to give protection to our homes. Okay, what happens when Mashiach comes? And no one has a Yetzer Hara anymore. And we don't need to protect our homes anymore. So then you don't need to have mitzvahs, they don't have mitzvahs anymore. I'm just throwing out an example. If a mitzvah has a reason, then the mitzvah is contingent upon the reason. And anything which is contingent by definition is theoretically one day can become batal, can become unnecessary. But if mitzvahs don't have a reason, if mitzvahs are simply the expression of their source, are an expression of Hashem's ratzon, then Hashem doesn't change, His ratzon doesn't change. Ani Hashem leisha nisi, Hashem doesn't change. So mitzvahs are forever. So how can we say that mitzvahs betelos la'asavav? How can we say that Mashiach comes, mitzvahs will be batal? So a lot of times when we have a medrash of the sort, we have to realize we have Yesodus in Torah, there's halacha. And if the medrash seems difficult, then we have to figure out what the medrash means. But a medrash cannot contradict our basic amunas, our basic amunah, and our basic halachas. Some of you might recall in Perek Nun of Tanya, Alter Rebbe quotes that it says in Kisvei Arizal that when Mashiach comes, the Levim will become the Kehanim. Because the avodah of the Levim is the avodah when Mashiach comes. Which is connected, by the way, to next week's Parsha, Parshas Korach.
Kehat was carrying the...
Where Korach, he wanted to live in times of Mashiach. He was a Levi, and he thought that his avodah was superior, and he wanted to therefore be the Kohen Gadol. And Korach wasn't wrong; he was just ahead of his times. I mean, he was wrong. Being ahead of your time is, in other words, and first and foremost, he was wrong for disagreeing with Moshe Rabbeinu. So, as we spoke when we learned Perek Nun, there's a whole beer from the Rebbe saying, Chas v'Shalom, we can't say that means that literally that when Mashiach comes, Levim will be Kehanim. Because in the Torah we have, it says that who is Kehanim? Someone who's Aaron, and someone who's Aaron's children. And Hazar Hakarev Yumos, anyone who's not from Mizera Aaron, anyone who's not from a direct descendant of Aaron HaKohen is not allowed to work in the Beis HaMikdash. And it's not possible that the Arizal should come and contradict something which is a mitzvah from the Torah. Impossible. So what does it mean? The Rebbe has to give a different explanation. But there are certain foundations. So what does it mean when we say mitzvah is betelos la'asalav? When Mashiach comes, the mitzvahs will be batal. So the Rebbe explains that the whole concept of a mitzvah is that there's the Yidden and there's Hashem, and we're a separate mitzias from Hashem, and Hashem is commanding us and telling us what to do. When Mashiach comes, and the connection and the kesher between Yidden and Hashem will become revealed, and we'll see how Yisrael v'kutshabrichu kulachad, the Yidden and Hashem are one.
Recording in
Then
progress.
there is no mitzvah anymore. Think about it for a second. Right now, I do a mitzvah because Hashem wants me to do the mitzvah, because it's a mitzvah, a commandment.
There's two people.
But what if I feel my oneness with Hashem? If I feel my oneness with Hashem, then I want to put up a mitzvah. Why? because Hashem wants to a mezuzah, and I'm one with Hashem, so we share the same ratzon. So of course we're going to keep on doing all the mitzvahs, but not as a tzivui, not as a command, but because we're going to be 100% in sync with Hashem's ratzon. You might want to say emerkava to Hashem's ratzon, to the point that everything we're doing, yes, of course, we're putting up mezuzahs and we're keeping Shabbos and we're making kiddush and we're davening, but that's an expression of our relationship with Hashem. It's not a mitzvah anymore. Mitzvah as in commandment, as there being two entities, the mitzvah and the mitzvah, the commander and the commanded, that doesn't exist anymore. But that's when Mashiach comes. But until then, when Hashem created the world, what did He want? He wanted mitzvahs.
Why you call it mitzvahs if it's one with a HaKodesh Baruch?
He wanted mitzvahs, and what He wanted to command people to do things. The 613 mitzvahs. Hashem had a desire. Good. How does that desire, that ratzon for mitzvahs, how does that come into fruition? In order for that to happen, you have to have bria yesh mi'ayin. Because if there isn't entities that are separate from Hashem, a davar nifrad, then there can't be mitzvahs. So the ratzon for mitzvahs expresses itself in Malchus, in the creation of yesh mi'ayin. So everything that we're learning is coming together. In other words, until this point, we're talking about how Malchus creates yesh mi'ayin and davar nifrad. Now we're saying how mitzvahs come from Malchus. And beforehand, we're saying that the gili of the Ein Sof is in Malchus create yesh mi'ayin. Now we're saying that the gili of the Ein Sof is the ratzon of Hashem and mitzvahs, which is in Malchus. And it's really all the same thing. All of these come together. Let's do this inside.
Yeah.
We'll start again from the Noah's Tchilasan B'Seifan. The beginning is wedged in the end. The beginning is the highest level of the Ein Sof is wedged in the end, which is Malchus. What is the beginning? Hu koyach ha'ein seif baruch hu. Livra yesh mi'ayin. The koyach of the Ein Sof to create something from nothing. V'lo ya'idei ilah v'olu. Not in the way of ilah v'olu. Why? Because by ilah v'olu she'ya olu mukaf mi'ilasei u'batul b'metzias. In the case of ilah v'olu, cause and effect, the effect is always batul. It is encompassed by and batul to its cause. Rak, rather Hashem desired that there should be yiyah hayesh davar nifrad malakus. There should be a yesh, something which is separate from malakus. Why? It's because Hashem wanted to be the Ein Sof, wanted to be a melech, a king over entities that are separate from him. And how was he a king? Through them doing his mitzvahs, which he should command them, and a commandment is only shaykh to something which is a yesh v'davar nifrad. And that's why bri yesh mi'ayin from Malchus, mitzvahs are from Malchus, and it's all the same thing. Why was there creation yesh mi'ayin from Malchus? In order to be able to have mitzvahs, so we have something separate from Hashem that can do that which Hashem commands. The soif ma'isa b'machshav atchila, and ultimately it is the bottom line. It is the end. It is Malchus and the mitzvahs that was the original intention of Hashem. And that's why it says in Yerushalmi, we know Reb Shimon Bar Yochai,
Recording in progress.
he was from those people who were Teirasei Umnasei. He was from the people who Torah was a special genre of people. Torah becomes their profession. Torah is everything, their metzias. Like people learning koil. But a little more than that. And if someone who's Tirasi Nasi, I don't know if today there's anyone who has that halachic gather of Tirasi Nasi, but someone has gather Tirasi Nasi is parted from a lot of mitzvahs. So, for example, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, someone who's Tirasi Nasi doesn't have to stop to say Krishma. Even when it comes to my Krishma, it doesn't have to stop to say Krishma. So the Gemara asks over there, the Yerushalmi, and does Rabbi Shimon? Can you tell? Are you really saying that Rabbi Shimon holds that someone who's Terasi Manasseh doesn't have to stop learning in order to shake lulav? And the Gemara Taka comes to Maskana over there that the Taka, even according to Rabbi Shimon, yeah, for Krishma, for whatever reason, you don't have to stop. But to shake lulav, even Rabbi Shimon holds that even someone who's Terasi Manasseh has to stop to shake a lulav. What's going on over there?
Why lulav is different from Krishma?
I don't know. Look at the Gemara over there. But that's the Maskana the Gemara reaches over there. But the point over here is, the Gemara is asking in a way of surprise, does Rav Shimon hold that you don't stop learning in order to shake lulav? Maybe taka is someone who's learning, doesn't have to shake lulav. But once we know that what we're saying over here, that even though then the system of worlds taka Torah is higher than mitzvahs, but once you go to the shayrish, once you go to the source, mitzvahs are higher. So it's inconceivable to say that someone who's learning Torah doesn't have to stop to do a mitzvah maisis, to do an action mitzvah. After all, ultimately in the source of everything knows tchilatzon, b'soifan. In the mitzvah maisis is where the ultimate kavana, the ultimate desire of the Ein Sof is in mitzvah maisius.
What's the mitzvah to learn Torah too?
It's not,
but mitzvah potter.
but the whole thing we're talking about over here is that in Keser, the mitzvahs are sourced in the Lavnunis and the Golgalta, and Torah is lower than that. Limudat Torah, ultimately, Limudat Torah is mitzvah maisius. Is not a mitzvah maisis. Then, Al Rebbe quotes that which Chazal tell us, says someone who learns without the intention of actually doing mitzvahs, just enjoys the learning Torah. So what does it say? Noyach lo shenishapcha shel yasei al panav v'chu. It would have been better for such a person if his placenta would have turned upside down before he was born, which is a nice way of saying
No, that's what I
it would be better if he wouldn't have
We're
born.
not born.
Right. But we know that every word of Chazal is exact. So if they didn't say Noyach le shlei nivra, they said Noyach le shenishapcha shel yasei, it would have been better if the placenta turned upside down. What's the significance of those words? So again, most of us, we don't pay attention to these details, but I'll tell you, points out how everything is exact. What does that mean? Ki, because hashilya neisrat chila mahatipa. Actually, you know what's the first thing that's created after conception? Is the placenta.
Oh, yeah?
V'hi levado hisei iker havlad ad mem yom. For the first 40 days of pregnancy, the main thing is the shilya. The main thing is the placenta. Shehischila tzuras havlad, until 40 days, after which the beginning of the child's form becomes start being formed. The kocha, the same thing. Hamitzvahs heina iker haTorah. The mitzvahs are the iker. The shorsha, and mitzvahs are the source of Torah, which is very interesting. We think that Torah is the source of mitzvahs, but it's the other way around. The mitzvahs are the source. In the system of worlds, Taka, Torah is higher. Torah is the source of mitzvahs. Torah is in Zah and mitzvahs are malchus. But once you go to the source in Keser, where did everything really begin? It began in Hashem's Ratzah, not in Hashem's Chachma. The Golgalta is higher than the Oichas Tumah. Hagam Sham Mitzvah Hi Gufnis, even though the mitzvahs are physical, Torah Hi Chachma. Torah is in Hashem's Chachma. Rak Shezeh B'chitzonius, Shezeh B'pnimius, Kedel Kaman. That's all. This is B'chitzonius. B'chitzonius externally, Torah is higher than mitzvahs, but B'pnimius is the other way around. So now we're seeing also someone who makes Torah the main thing more than mitzvahs. It's like prioritizing the placenta over the baby. Why? Because the placenta comes first. So you think placenta might be more important, but ultimately, what's the goal? The placenta or the child?
Child.
The child. The same thing is also in the system of worlds. What comes first is Torah. Torah's and Zod. Torah's and Chachma. Mitzvahs are only in Malchus. So you might think mitzvah Torah is more important, but no. The main thing is the mitzvahs. The main thing is the child. Someone who learns Torah and without intention of doing mitzvahs, it would have been better if the placenta would have been turned upside down, because what he's doing is he's turning everything upside down and making the placenta the main thing rather than the child. Mm-hmm. So what do we have over here? We're beginning with this. So far we talked about the idea of the superiority of Malchus. That even though Malchus is the lowest sphera, nevertheless within Malchus there's the Gili of the Ein Sof in order to create worlds. And now we conclude another Nukuda, which is that Malchus is associated with mitzvahs, and the higher spheres are associated with Torah. And Soif Ma'asav Machshavat Chila, not Chilasan B'Soifan, the value of mitzvahs Ma'asav is the value of action mitzvahs. And with that, we'll stop for now. And I want to connect this to the Parsha. A very fascinating idea from the Rebbe connects to the Parsha from multiple directions, as we shall see. But in order to understand this idea from the Rebbe, we have to first read a little piece of Gemara. The Gemara I'm about to read, it's from Satlas Baba Basra. From Perek HaMoicher Sasfina. So you have over here famously, you have what's called the Havayis of Rabbi Bar Chana. There was an Amoira, his name was Rabbi Bar Chana. Rabbi Bar Chana was a nephew or great nephew of Rabbi Chia. He was an Amoira. He was born in Bavel, and eventually he went up to Eretz Yisrael, and he studied under Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara tells us a lot of fascinating stories. What's a better word than fascinating?
Detail.
No. Stories that are crazy stories, bizarre stories that he claims to have witnessed. It's two blot in the Gemara that tell us one blot or two blot that tell us what's called many different stories that he claims to have experienced. Now, according to most Mefarshim, these stories are not meant to be understood literally. They're all mishalim, they're all metaphors, and therefore there are many different. Many of the Mefarshim try to figure out what are the messages that Rabbi Bar Bachana is trying to tell us.
Fantastic.
Sorry? Fantastic, yes.
Fantastic is the word you
Fantastic stories, correct.
Which daf?
It starts on Ayin Gimel Lamed Aleph. So one of the stories he said, Zimna Chada Hava Kasdinon B'Madbira. At one time, it says we were traveling in the desert. V'islavi Bahadana Hutaya. There was an Arab merchant. Rashi says a Seicher Yishmael, an Arab merchant who accompanied us. And then he says one story about this Arab merchant, but then he says, Amarli, the Arab merchant, one day, this merchant tells me, Ta, come, Achvi Loch, I want to show you Meisei Midbar. I want to show you the dead of the Midbar. So Asli we went, Chazisino, and we saw them. So they saw lying on the floor of the desert. They saw the dead people of the corpses. Vidamu, they seemed kiman de mifsimi. They looked like they were drunk. As the Rashbam, actually I said Rashi, it's Rashbam. The Rashbam says that their faces, like someone was drunk, their faces red and shiny. Their faces were red and shiny. Vigonu aparki, they were all lying on their backs. One of the corpses, it had
knee.
Instead of his foot set straight, his knee was up. This merchant, he passed beneath the knee, and while he was riding on his camel, and his spear was held up. So can you imagine we're talking about 15 feet or 20 feet.
Right?
And that's how, in other words, he's trying to bring out how incredibly tall and how incredibly large these bodies were, that his knee was up and he was able to pass under it
Like an ox.
With a camel.
with his camel while holding up his not a sword, a reimach, which is even bigger, a spear. Yeah. Paski chad karna de tchilta, de chad minayu. So Rabbi Bachana says, I cut off the corner of the tchilas, of the tzitzis, of one of these people. So the way the Rashbam explains it, the way the Gemara explains it afterwards, so there's a machlokes in Masechtas Menachos between Beshama and Beis Hillel about tzitzis, how many strings we have in tzitzis. So Rabbi Bachana figures, this is perfect, let me cut off one of the tzitzis, I'll bring it back to Bezdin, we'll examine it, and we'll know what the halacha is like. But as soon as he cut it off and took it, he wasn't able to move. They weren't able to move. Amar Li. So the merchant told me, Dilma shaklas midi minayu. Did you maybe take something from them? Ahadre. Give it back. The gemidi, because we have a tradition, the man de shakal midi minayu is someone who takes something from them. Le mistagile. Isn't able to move. In other words, he got stuck in their spot. So Asli, Ahadarte, Rabbi Chana says, I returned it to Hadar mistagile. Hadar mistagile, and then we were able to move on. That's the story that's in the Gemara.
Fascinating.
It's obviously a puzzling Gemara, you want to say a fantastic Gemara on many levels. What does it mean? What's going on over there? So there's a Rishima from the Rebbe, you know, that after the Multamos, they found in the Rebbe's desk some notebooks with some Chilush Torah the Rebbe wrote decades beforehand. And there's one of the pieces the Rebbe talks about this piece of Gemara. Apparently, the Rebbe wrote it in order to send it to his father, because the Rebbe left the Soviet Union in 1927. The Rebbe's father was arrested in 1939. So there was 12 years, and then he was 5 years in Galus, and then the Rebbe's father passed away in 1944. But for the 12 years that the Rebbe was during those years, the Rebbe was in Berlin, and the Rebbe was in France from 1927 through 1939. So during those years, they would correspond. The Rebbe and the father correspond by mail. And what do you think the correspondence was about? It wasn't about the weather.
Torah.
Unfortunately, we don't have the letters that the Rebbe sent. Probably was all destroyed by the Nazis when they entered the city. But the Rebbe, he saved all the letters from his father, and they're printed in a sefer called Lekutei Levi Yitzchak. All the letters are filled with Kabbalah. The Rebbe's father, long letters. But once in a while, the Rebbe's father will, he mentions the things that the Rebbe wrote to him in his letters. So we don't have the letters the Rebbe wrote. So one of the letters from Tafrei Sadik Vav from 1936. So the Rebbe's father thanks him for sending that piece on this Gemara about the merchant and the Meisei Midbar. So probably 2 + 2 = 4. Probably this was the piece that the Rebbe wrote and sent off to his father. But so the Rebbe it's in the Rebbe's notebooks. The Rebbe says like this. But in order to understand what the Rebbe is saying, we need to first back up a little and talk a little more largely about the story of this week's parsha and the Meraglim. By the way, you realize the connection to this week's parsha, both the Meraglim and also Tzitzis, which is the end of the parsha. So we have from both sides.
But the
connection.
Gemara talking about the tzitzit, when he put it back, he put it together or just throw it on the floor?
It doesn't say, but
Doesn't say.
The story of the Meraglim, the story of this week's parsha, is arguably one of the most also puzzling and bizarre stories in the Torah. The Jews, they send off spies to Eretz Yisrael to find out what it's like. The spies come back, and they tell the Yidden, Chazaku mimenu, we're not going to be able to go in, they're stronger than us. As the Gemara says in Soita, Chazaku mimenu, they're stronger than Hashem, Kaviyachum. This is a nation of Yidden that experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf a little more than a year ago. They experienced Matan Torah a year ago. It's not to say even that they experienced would be an understatement. They lived a miraculous existence. They woke up that morning. What did they eat?
Mun.
They ate the mun. What did they drink? They drank from the Ve'er Shel Miriam.
They didn't change
The
clothes.
clothing that they were wearing was laundered by the Anani Yakovid. And these are the people who are saying that it makes no sense. And also, we also know that these Yidden were on a high madrega. So they're there.
Makes sense.
The Gemara says, the Pasuk, Tehillim, Isfuli Chasidai, Karisei Brisi Ali Zavach, is the Deira Midbar, the Chasidai. What does it mean? So the Alter Rebbe explains, and Lekutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe explains, the Rebbe expands upon this in many sichos. What were the Yidden doing the whole time in the Midbar? They didn't have to work. They didn't have to worry about Parnasa. What were they doing? They were davening, they were learning Torah, they were being mispoided, they were being mispointed, connecting to Hashem. And suddenly they find out that they have to go into the real world. They have to get jobs. They have to deal with money. They have to plow fields. They have to harvest fields.
No koil.
They had no interest in it. No interest in it. Not only that, they were very scared of it. Very scared. They were saying, what's the lashon of the pasuk? Eretz ichelas yishveha. It's a land that eats up its inhabitants. The Eretz, the Artzius, the Gashmius eats up the people alive. You can't be there and survive and be a Yid, and be a Chassid, and be a spiritual person. That was really what was going on.
Then it seems so that.
And what did Hashem say? What?
Only the same, and they try to.
It's another reason. The Meraglim who went were great people. It's a Shak Sheremai. Moshe didn't pick.
Rashi Aida.
So, bottom line, what happens? What did Hashem tell them? You think into it. What is the punishment that Hashem gave them?
Just stay in the middle.
Stay in the middle.
40 years.
No, but that sounds like a terrible punishment. But at the end of the day, really, that's what they wanted.
And they got what they
They got what
wanted.
they wanted.
It's not a punishment.
Right.
But they don't want it to do that there.
Ultimately, it was a punishment. But the bottom line is, this is what you want, this is what you'll get. Okay. Tapchem, your children, they'll go in. And this was a very high madriga. These people were on a very high level. These were people who were completely and totally detached from Gashmias. had no desire for Gashmias. And once we understand this, let's look at the story. So Rabbi Bar Chana goes off in the desert, and he wants to see Meisei Midbar. Which, by the way, it's interesting. Why do you call them Meisei Midbar? The dead people of the Midbar. Other you can call them by other terms, by other names. Der Moshe, the Der Yotzei Mitzrayim. The word Meisei, Mem Sof Yud, the Rebbe says, also can be read as Mesei, as like Mesei Mispar. What does Mesei mean? Mesei Ma'at. Mesei means people. Mesei Midbar means these are desert people. What do you mean the desert people? What is a desert? A desert is a place where there is no work and there is no homes, there is no cities, there is no civilization.
It's nothing.
Yeah, these were desert people.
The Samach, right?
Sorry?
That's with the Samach, no?
No. Listen.
You say?
Yeah, Mesei Ma'at, Mesei Mispar. It's with the stuff. So Rabbi Bar Chana goes and he sees them. And what does he see? He sees that they're drunk. What do you mean that they look like they're drunk? We know it says Nadav and Avihu, they were drunk when they went into the... Drunkenness represents the idea of Nichnas Yayin, you know Yayin, Yatsa Soid. You know that Yayin and Soid is the same gematria. They both have the gematria of 70. The secrets of Torah are called Yayin. They were drunk. They were drunk on the deepest mysteries of Torah, the deepest secrets of Torah. That's what they were. They were lost in the Pardes. Viganua Parkid. They were all lying on their backs. What does that mean? If you're lying on their backs, that means that their face, their pneumius, is looking straight up at Hashem. They were constantly in that state of. These were huge people. They were huge people. They were drunk with the secrets of Torah. Their pneumius was directed towards Hashem. You know, there's a machlokes whether Deir HaMidbar, whether they have a chelik ba'olam haba or not. So one opinion we mentioned earlier, opinion which is that of course they have a chelik ba'olam haba, because it says Isfuli Chasidai Kersebris Yalei Zavach. That these are Hashem's chassidim. Hashem says gather them for me. There's another opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, however, that they have no chelik ba'olam haba. The Helik in Megala Amuki says, Rabbi quotes this. What does it mean Elam chelik ba'olam haba? That they're higher than Elam haba. That these are people who were so high that for them Elam haba isn't even a reward. They're higher than Elam haba. This is how great these people were. One of these people, as mentioned, their foot was up, and this merchant. What is a merchant? Keep on talking about this merchant. A merchant is a yid who went into Eretz Yisrael. How is that? A merchant uses money, gold and silver. And what is a merchant is constantly transferring property from one ownership to another ownership. That's what a yid does. Every time we do mitzvahs maisius, every time we do a mitzvah with a physical object, what we're doing is we're taking something from the Rishus Harabim and transferring it to the Rishus of Hashem. And we do so using our gold and silver, which, as we know, gold and silver represent Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So that's a merchant. A merchant is someone who's actually involved in mitzvahs maisius. Not the Meisei Midbar. The Meisei Midbar were not merchants. They were not involved in mitzvahs maisius. That was their whole point. They stayed in the desert. They were not involved in Gashmias. They were not transferring things from this world into the next world. They were sitting on learning Torah. So this merchant went underneath the foot. Went underneath the foot. What is the foot? The foot represents the lowest part of the body. This merchant, riding on his camel, which means riding on his Yetzer Hara, riding on his Nafsh Bahamas, holding his Reimach, holding his spear. What is the spear? The Zohar tells us that the Shema has 248 words, which is our Reimach. The Shema is our spear. The Shema represents Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, we have this Yid, this merchant, this Yid who is involved in doing mitzvahs maisius, with everything, including even with Mesiras Nefesh. At the end of the day, he doesn't even reach the foot. He doesn't even reach the foot of the Meisei Midbar. To put it in different words, the merchant's good day isn't as good as the Meisei Midbar's lowest day. The Yid who goes into Eretz Yisrael and is busy doing mitzvahs maisius, planting his field, harvesting his field, truma, meiser, mezuzis, maika, all the mitzvahs, is nowhere near the level of Meisei Midbar. When Rabbi Bar Chana sees this, he's like, this is crazy. these people are so great. He wanted to adopt a little of that avodah for himself. So what does he do? He cuts off the tchelas of one of them, and he wants to hold on to it. What is tchelas? Tchelas is the color of the sky. Tchelas shares the same root as kveis hanefesh. The idea of tchelas is that this desire to leave this world, to be above the world and beyond the world. He cuts it off a little, and he puts it in his pocket. And then he can't move. And the merchant tells him, we have a tradition. And it's a tradition. It's not something which makes sense, it's a tradition. That if you take something from them, you can't move. We know the milah of Yidden over here is that we are called Mahalchim. Not Oimdim. With all the greatness of the people of the Deir HaMidbar, they're not Mahalchim. To become a Mahalach, to move, is only through mitzvahs ma'asiyos. So drop the tchelas and leave the midbar and go back and do some mitzvahs. That's how the Rebbe explains this piece of Gemara.
It's nice.
This is mamish what we're talking about in Tanya over here. They may say midbar, these were people who got stuck in the shilia, they got stuck in the placenta. Were they great? They were the greatest. Because you remember, when you're in the system of worlds, what's the greatest is Torah. Torah is higher than mitzvahs. Someone who's doing mitzvahs are in the hay of Malchus and Torah is in Zah. Someone who's doing mitzvahs, again, can go under the foot, doesn't get anywhere. But ultimately, where is the Tachlis HaKavana? Seif Maisev Machshav V'Tchila, no it's Tchilasam B'Seifan. The Kavana is Nafka Mitzvahs Maisius. The Kavana is to go into Eretz Yisrael, to do mitzvahs, to make the world to dir b'tachtonim, and that's where everything really is at.